Welcome to Daily Brief YouTube channel. Tensions between Ukraine and Russia are increasing with each passing hour. Intense attacks and bombardments were also carried out on the 10th day of the clashes. However, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine declared all-out defense and the capital Kyiv is very tightly guarded, displaying a great example of resistance. It also counter-attacks and carries out operations to destroy all Russian armored tank units around Kyiv and in the city of Sumy. In an on-camera briefing at the Pentagon on Friday, Pentagon spokesman John Kirby said Ukrainian actions stopped a large Russian military armored convoy heading in the direction of Kyiv. We have reports that a bridge that we believe was on the way was blown up. We also have signs that Ukrainians hit the convoy in other places and in vehicles, he said. The operation is believed to have taken place in the Sumy area. We believe that the actions of the Ukrainians stopped this convoy, definitely slowed it down, stopped it in some places, he said. Kirby said the United States also believes that Russian forces' own difficulties with supplies, logistics and fuel are slowing the movement of transport. In the direction of Volyn, the armed forces of Ukraine guard certain borders. In the direction of Syversky, mechanized and tank units stably defend the established borders around Chernihiv, said the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. In Slobodchina, the mechanized units of the Armed Forces of Ukraine effectively conduct defensive battles against the overwhelming forces of Russia and are successful in some areas. Russia suffers heavy losses. The Ukrainian town of Mariupol remains an example of heroic resistance to Russian occupation. In the direction of Primorsky, units of the Armed Forces of Ukraine conduct a defensive operation in the operational zone, which covers part of the seacoast. Part of the forces performs the task of preventing the enemy from passing through the settlements of Mykolaiv. However, the Kherson region and Chernobyl fell into the hands of Russia. The Kyiv City Defense Group continues to repel the enemy's attack, open fire on it and protect the defensive lines around the city and major airports. Subjected to a recoil, the enemy opened fire on civilian buildings from the southwestern outskirts of the Ukrainian capital. Also yesterday, the defenders of Mykolaiv in southern Ukraine recaptured Kulbakine airfield and captured enemy equipment. It is reported by the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine that Russian tank units and other armored units around Sumy suffered very serious losses as a result of the Ukrainian attacks. The city of Sumy is on the main road to the Ukrainian capital Kyiv and just 30 kilometers from the Russian border. It is adjacent to the city of Kharkiv, where a great example of resistance was experienced the other day. Currently, the three most important cities of Ukraine excluding the western Black Sea are Kharkiv, Sumy and the capital Kyiv. The existing support convoys of Russia also have to go through the Sumy or Kharkiv defenses in order to go to the capital Kyiv, but they suffer serious losses on this road. At noon today, in the Sumy region, the armed forces of Ukraine stopped a convoy of all Russian armored vehicles heading to Kiev. Officials of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine alleged that the Russian armored convoy was completely destroyed. If these allegations are true, Russia seems to be in a serious situation in the region. The head of the Sumy Regional Military Administration, Dmytro Shevitsky, also released images of damaged Russian T-72 tanks moving towards the capital along the Kypty-Bachisk road. Shevitsky shared, "This Russian armored equipment is advancing towards Kiev. We were able to stop it in the Sumy region. Because the Sumy region is the northern outpost of Ukraine. Thanks to everyone who participated," said. According to the head of the Sumy Regional Military Administration, the situation in the Shatka and Konotop regions is more or less calm. There are power and water cuts. Regional defense units and public service providers are working. The needs of communities are being met as much as possible, Shevitsky said. Such a unity of citizens and defense forces has never been seen before. We are ready to repel and defeat the enemy. On the outskirts of the capital, I am sure that the aggressor will feel all the anger of the Ukrainian people," said. According to the report of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, while all necessary measures are taken to repel the aggressor, checkpoints and observation points are established and mobile patrol groups are formed. The head of the Kyiv Military Administration, Mykola Janov, said that the situation in the Ukrainian capital is tense today, but the military and regional defense forces are being trained to defend Kiev. According to him, the territorial defense is getting stronger day by day. Checkpoints, castles are set up and objects are mined. Every neighborhood, every street and house has been turned into an impregnable fortress. He also said that the situation on the outskirts of Kiev is controlled by the Ukrainian army, but the most dangerous directions are the Zhytomyr and Vyshgorod directions, as well as Bucha and Irpin, and the defense of Sumy and Kharkiv is vital for Kyiv. Meanwhile, Russia's losses in Ukraine are reaching serious proportions. The latest updates on Russian casualties were announced by the Ukrainian army. According to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, since the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine, Russian troops have lost more than 10,000 troops. By the way, on the 10th day of the conflict, Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar said that Russia's 39 aircraft, 40 helicopters, 251 tanks, 939 armored combat vehicles, 18 air defense units, 50 MLRS, 404 vehicles, 60 fuel tanks, 105 artillery systems, 3 operational UAVs. Reported that he lost 2 speedboats. Defense officials of the Russian Federation claim that the losses announced by Ukraine are much more than the truth. As Ukrainian forces continued to resist, Russian President Vladimir Putin increased his threats. In the first major city captured by Russia, public protests began. A limited truce is declared in a besieged city. Israeli Prime Minister visiting Moscow. Putin issued his threats as Ukrainians across the country continued to demonstrate audacious patriotism, even in places captured by the Russians. In Kherson, the first major city to be captured by Russian troops, hundreds of protesters gathered in the central square at 10 a.m. on Saturday and waved several Ukrainian flags, according to confirmed video broadcast live from the scene. According to Israeli and Russian officials, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett traveled to Moscow to meet with Putin. A statement from Mr. Bennett's office said the meeting lasted about 3 hours and took place, with the coordination and approval of the U.S. administration. No immediate information was given about any outcome from the meeting. Meanwhile, the Pentagon said it was deployed by the U.S. European Command on the anti-conflict hotline between the U.S. and Russia. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby said at a briefing at the Pentagon on Friday that the anti-conflict line established this week between the United States and Russia is at the bilateral, U.S.-Russia level of conflict prevention. The line is managed by U.S. European Command under the command of General Todd Wolters, commander of U.S. European Command. This is being run as a bipartisan U.S. against Russia, so it is run from U.S. European Command headquarters and not under the NATO hat of General Wolters, Kirby said. Kirby said the conflict avoidance hotline was valuable for reducing the risks of miscalculation and being able to communicate in real time if necessary, especially now that the airspace over Ukraine is being discussed by both Russian and Ukrainian aircraft. Kirby said the phone line was at a lower operational level. It is mainly staffed by staff-level officers at European Command headquarters, he continued. More background. A senior U.S. defense official told reporters on Friday that the anti-conflict hotline set up this week between the U.S. and Russia worked in its initial setup. The phone line was working during the first test call by the United States to Russia, the official said. In situ, the Russians have acknowledged this. They answered the phone in our first test, so we know they know who is calling and will adjust, at least in terms of initial launch. It worked and they even answered, he said. The establishment of the agreement was particularly noteworthy because so far Pentagon officials have said they have not had any direct communication with their Russian counterparts since the invasion. Since the end of last month there was an effort to establish the communication line. Defense Minister Lloyd Austin last met with Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu on February 18. Both spoke a week ago. The Chief of the General Staff, General Mark Milley, last met with the Chief of the Russian General Staff, General Valery Gerasimov, on the 11th of February. The U.S. has specifically denied any no-fly zones over Ukraine, saying it would put U.S. pilots in a war scenario to implement such a plan. But officials say the door to a potential future air humanitarian corridor has not been closed to ensure the safe flight of relief supplies. There has been a non-conflict protocol between U.S. and Russian forces in Syria for several years. For the most part it worked, but U.S. officials have complained several times that the Russians had not given enough advance warning of their operations. The U.S. does not provide detailed information to Russia, but recently reported when U.S. planes will operate over a large area in northeast Syria.